Well, hello, friends. Hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Uncivil Law, and we're here with a response video to everyone's favorite legal commentator, our friend on the left-hand side of the legal aisle, none other than Legal Eagle himself, Devin Stone, who made a video endorsing Biden that was so high on its own fumes that it was a thing to behold. And I was debating whether or not to share this with you and react to it with you. Because on the one hand, it might be fun. But on the other hand, it would mean that I would have to implicitly subject you to the video. And even though I'm not a doctor, a first do no harm principle does seem like a good idea in general. So I was debating the merits of that ethics position. So I'll leave it up to you and just take note that, you have been warned. This will involve you watching some Legal Eagle. I'm sorry. There's just no way to avoid it. So we are here with his latest chef d'oeuvre, which he has entitled "Vote for the Rule of Law." Period. So I figured, why not? I just entitled my video also "Vote for the Rule of Law." Period, because that sounds like fun. Just borrow his title completely as part of the point of the whole thing. All right, so we're going to listen to this endorsement discussion about rule of law and the horrible, evil Trump and the rest of it. So, all right, let's get started with this thing.
When I was a kid, I used to wonder how it was possible that the Roman Republic could just fall. The Roman Republic and the Roman Empire stood for hundreds of years, and yet it all came crashing down. My history teacher would say the barbarians invaded, but in truth, it collapsed from the inside out. Because when
Okay, we have to pause here just to start. All right. So right away, we are very high on our own fumes of our self-righteousness here. Our self-righteousness could not be more demonstrably presented if we tried. I'm going to start by telling you about the fall of Rome, and this is just like the fall of Rome. I mean, the setup of this is pretentious, and it's just so blatantly pretentious. I just love it. And then the reason I had to pause here is because now we're going to do a very slow tightening in on the shot. So the shot was a little bit wider, right? And we're going to do a very slow zoom in, dramatic effect. Look for it. It's just this little touch here and the dramatic touch of this slow zoom in. It's about to start. So yeah, watch this.
Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it was clear. The rule of law didn't matter anymore. And that was the beginning of the end. Because the rule of law matters. The mission of Legal Eagle is...
Okay, so let's just discuss a little bit of our history here for the fall of Rome and the Roman Republic and Caesar and what happened in that situation, just to bring some compare and contrast. All right, so what happened with Caesar in the Roman Republic? So Caesar was a governor of part of the Roman Empire, and as his term was expiring as governor, he had to give military authority over that. But rather than give up his military authority, he decided to march his troops into Rome, which he was definitely not allowed to do. So basically, he was a governor of a province, essentially, and also the commander-in-chief for that province, essentially. And he had control over his military troops in that province, essentially. And as his term expired, he would no longer have control over his troops. But rather than give over control of his troops, he marched his troops into Rome proper, which is pretty much an act of war directly. And that's how Caesar came to be. So, yeah, when Caesar did this, it was pretty blatant. I don't really have authority, but I'm going to take my troops and I'm just going to take it. So apparently Trump is in the same category here. Okay, that's, yeah.
to explain our laws, to explain how the system works when it works. It's not my place to tell you what policies our politicians should adopt. But as a lawyer with an inside view to our judicial system, I think I have an insight into at least this aspect of our government. And over the last 4 years, one thing has become clear. President Trump doesn't care about the law. He's ignorant of the law and actively subverts the law. He uses the law for his own gain, and he breaks the law when it stands in his way. If you care about the rule of law in America, you cannot, in good conscience, vote for Donald Trump.
Just this might be a nitpick, and maybe Devin's trying to say something other than what he literally said, because what he literally said is Trump is trying to use the law for his own advantage. And I don't know, like, what he's really trying to say, but on a literal level, like, yes, and so is like everyone else. Everyone uses the law to their own advantage. That's kind of the point of there being laws. It's like, here's a legal process of you to do things. So it's like, it's a little bit like saying I use the law. I mean, it's a little bit like saying I use the law to my advantage by going to a car dealership and paying money and buying a car because I wanted a car. Yes, I use the law to my advantage for my own personal gain. That is a thing that people do on a relatively routine basis. So I don't know if he's trying to say something like more sinister than that, but on a very literal level, it's like, yes, people use the law to their advantage all the time. It's legal. It's kind of that's encouraged. You're supposed to use the law to your own advantage. You're not supposed to break laws. That's the problem. So yes, use laws to your advantage. That's fine. And then he says, well, and he breaks laws when he gets frustrating. It's like, okay, maybe he does break laws or he doesn't, but we can go analyze those legal issues one at a time and deal with that. But, I mean, it's just a little bit weird, and I'm sure he's going to tell us what specific laws have been broken so we can go analyze that, and that might be interesting. But is Trump really some sort of unique snowflake in this domain? Is he really that fundamentally different than many other past presidents? And this could be perceived as a little bit of whataboutism, because I'm like, well, what about these other presidents or other people that have broken the law? So it is a little bit about it could be perceived as whataboutism, but it's also a little bit like, well, why are we treating this situation, which is materially similar, different than other situations? It just goes to show bias too. So I think there's a couple different ways to analyze that.
This video is not about politics per se. It's not about liking or disliking the legislation that President Trump has signed. It's not about liking or disliking the way he has handled the COVID-19 epidemic, nor is it about liking or disliking the judges that he has appointed. This video is about the rule of law. It's about legal equity and legal equality, and it's about justice. And I guess when the Scientific American breaks with 175 years of tradition to endorse a presidential candidate, I guess no one, including the lawyers, can stand idly by on the sideline.
That doesn't even begin to make sense. Lawyers pretty much do not stand idly by on the sideline, kind of almost definitionally. Lawyers are principally advocates for their client. So to say Scientific American has broke precedent by endorsing someone, that means even the lawyers should get involved. I'm like, when were the lawyers ever not involved? The lawyers are always involved and stuff. So like, yeah, this is an occasion when we too must get involved. I kind of think we were there the whole time, man. I don't know.
So for the first and hopefully only time, Legal Eagle endorses a presidential candidate. Legal Eagle endorses Joe Biden for president. He is the only candidate that has.
I'm thrilled for you, Legal Eagle. You can endorse anyone you like. I have no objection to your endorsing whomever you think is best. That's fine. But you're about to disparage anyone who thinks otherwise. This isn't about politics. This isn't about party. But if you vote for the other guy, you're a demon hellspawn. It reminds me a little bit of when Biden said at the debate, it's like, I don't see red states and blue states. I see the United States. But as to the red states, they've really blown it. Yeah, okay, this is not political. Sure. All right, let's go with that.
Any hope of upholding the rule of law in this country. Why? Because President Donald Trump is a criminal. We know this to an almost certainty. There's so much evidence hiding in plain sight that it's actually sometimes hard to remember everything that he's done. But before we vote in November, let's at least try. You might recall that President Trump is actually unindicted co-conspirator individual number 1 to the conspiracy Michael Cohen has already pleaded guilty to regarding the illegal hush money payments to porn stars. Michael Cohen, the president's former attorney, pleaded guilty to 8 criminal charges. 5 counts of tax evasion, 1 count of making false statements to a financial institution, 1 count of willfully causing an unlawful corporate contribution, and 1 count of making an excessive campaign contribution at the request of President Trump for the principal purpose of influencing the election. Michael Cohen went to jail for those crimes and committed those crimes at the direction of the president. But now President Trump did not go to jail. He stayed in office. But that doesn't make
Yeah, so President Trump's potential liability with respect to this Michael Cohen thing is an interesting thing, to be sure. But there's you can, of course, he is an unindicted co-conspirator. That doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that he's guilty of anything in particular. But his liability is a little bit interesting because it's like, what exactly did he direct him to do and what didn't he direct him to do, and were those actions legal or not? Because it can get very much into the nuance of exactly what Trump said or not said, because various things that a person says or doesn't say can be legal or not legal. So, if he's directing Michael Cohen to perform specific illegal acts, that's a problem. If he's directing Michael Cohen as his lawyer to make certain results occur, and then Michael Cohen, as a consequence of that, is performing illegal acts, then that wouldn't be the responsibility of Trump. That would be the responsibility of Cohen. So it depends a lot on what the nature of the direction was. So, like, for example, when, if Trump was saying, for example, to help deal with rumors about his various indiscretions on a personal level, and he's asking his lawyer to try to deal with that and to make settlements, then that would be proper. It depends a lot on specifically what happens. So a lot gets into particular vernacular and whether or not Cohen was really being directed to do specific illegal things or if he went off the reservation of it. So there's some nuance there to be had. But if you want to conclude that Trump did some illegal things, then okay, I suppose. We could look again to whether other politicians have done illegal things, including, for example, another person who's currently running for office right now, who may have done some specific illegal things, such as taking money in improper ways as part of peddling influence. So if the idea here is that Trump has violated the law because of potentially what he did to Cohen, which is a reasonable conclusion one might be able to draw based on the relevant facts, then one might ask about other candidates who are running for office and their potential criminal liability for potential things they may have done or may not have done, including perhaps directing particular people to be a rat hole, to take money for them but in their name, so it's not tied to them, but it's really their money even though it's not in their name. It's called a rat hole. So maybe directing certain people to be a rat hole, and maybe peddling influence, and maybe having buying influence, and maybe indirectly getting large pools of money to peddle particular influences. And you could look at those facts and you could come to the conclusion that Joe Biden didn't do anything illegal. That's possible, because then again, it becomes essentially the same issue, more or less. A lot more or less, to be quite honest, but in the grand scheme, it's kind of similar. So like when Trump was dealing with Cohen, what was the nature of those directions? And when Joe Biden was dealing with Hunter Biden, what were the nature of those directions? So depending, again, on exactly what Joe Biden said and exactly what Joe Biden did, it may be legal, it may not be legal. It depends a whole lot on what he knew and what he didn't know and what exactly he was doing and all the rest of it. But you could ask those questions too, and we're not going to ask any of those questions because those are inconvenient questions right now. And then you could even get into like, what is worse? Assuming that both are true, what is worse? Is it worse for Trump to direct someone to make payments as part of his endeavors, or is it worse for Biden to collect money to facilitate access as part of which is worse? And then you could make that kind of determination. But we're not going to do that right now because that would be super inconvenient. We're just going to talk about Trump's potential criminal liability. We're not going to focus on anything dealing with Joe's potential criminal liability because that would be inconvenient. All right, let's press on.
Make him any less guilty than the people that he directed. And after President Trump stayed in office, he tried to use $400 million in taxpayer funds allocated for the defense of Ukraine to fabricate dirt on his political opponent. Effectively, the president tried to blackmail a strategic partner using taxpayer funds into soliciting a bribe for his own benefit. And not for nothing.
Okay. Again, we have to raise the possibility that if Trump used money, if we're accusing Trump of using money in a foreign country to buy prosecutions that would favor his political opponents, one might again raise the very real question about whether maybe or not Joe Biden also did this. Did Joe Biden use public funds or the threat of withholding public funds that were being directed by Congress and said, if you don't do this for me, I will not give you those monies? How about that? When you want to talk about that at all? That and then magically this prosecutor who was going to look into Biden's affairs suddenly is fired. Now maybe that's proper. Maybe there's no corruption there at all. Maybe that prosecutor should have been fired for other reasons. So maybe Joe Biden didn't do anything wrong, and maybe it was a perfectly normal and ordinary thing for Joe Biden to do. And maybe this was a perfectly proper thing to do, but it does look a little sus. And we could ask about those questions, but, we're going to talk about Donald Trump and his use of taxpayer monies to obtain particular political advantages in foreign countries. But we're not going to talk about Joe Biden's potential use of public monies to obtain specific personal advantages in foreign countries. No, that would just be too inconvenient. All right, let's press on.
Nothing to try and create exactly the kind of narrative that he was able to use in 2016 against his former opponent.
It was beautiful. It was just a perfect conversation.
After the scheme was discovered, the president then punished the whistleblowers who brought it to the public's attention. Apart from the illegality, this is the kind of malfeasance that goes straight to the heart of our democracy. This is about interfering with the voter's choice. This is about creating black propaganda for one's own benefit. And this is about using...
Oh my God. All right. So we want to talk about creating black propaganda for our own benefit. Okay, so we want to talk about creating black propaganda for our own political benefit. At this point, I'd like to mention the Steele dossier, which was completely fabricated, and all the fake things that were done to create fake FISA warrants in violation of law by the Obama administration, who went to the FISA court and told some little white lies. And then there's this whole thing with the Steele dossier, which is essentially completely black propaganda that was created by the Democrats against the Republicans. I mean, Lord, man, do we have any insight here? I mean, a pox on both of our houses, maybe. But we don't want to talk about at all about the Steele dossier. We don't want to talk all about the FISA warrants. We don't want to talk at all about the FBI agent Stoke. We don't want to talk about him and his plans that Trump cannot be president and essentially engaged on a one-man crusade to prevent the president from being the president. We don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about whether or not the Obama administration spied on the Trump administration as they were coming into office and the violation of those potential norms. No, we just want to talk about Trump and his potential violations. Oh, Trump is creating black propaganda, unlike the Democrats. Again, this could be perceived as whataboutism, but it's also highlighting the fact there's a little bit of disparate treatment here. So if you accuse me of whataboutism, you have to accuse him of whataboutism because he's doing the exact same thing in reverse. He's only focusing on the narrative that's good for his side. So the special pleading and the unequal application is more at the point I'm trying to highlight at this point. Yeah. Let's press on.
Using the funds, the mighty forces of the United States for one's own personal benefit. And you might recall that the Watergate break-in occurred because President Nixon wanted an election advantage. Do not forget that President Trump was impeached.
Yes.
However, he was not removed.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that his actions were neither impeachable nor illegal. It means that certain political figures made a political decision to allow him to stay. And if
right. Which is because it's an inherently political question, not a legal question, as Legal Eagle, I'm sure, is more than well aware. As I have explained many, many times on my channel, impeachment is not a legal process. It is a political process. It is up to the political branches. It is a political remedy for political wrong. So, he's correct. He's correct in so much as Trump being found not to be removed doesn't mean that he didn't violate the law. That's true. That's not a legal finding. It's a political finding. Correct. So you can simultaneously believe that Trump committed crimes and still vote against this impeachment if you want it. Yeah, because those are disconnected questions. It's not a legal question. It's a political question. And as to whether or not they're impeachable, I've taken the broad proposition that anything is impeachable because it's a political question and not subject to review. So, yeah, can he be impeached for it? Sure. But as far as I'm concerned, he can be impeached for literally anything because it's political. Does it mean that he didn't commit crimes? No, it doesn't mean that because it's not a legal finding. So, sure, and you say, well, they made a political decision for political advantage. And I'm like, yes, but it's a political process in a political branch. So they made a political decision for political advantage. So your point is what exactly? The political branches acted in a political way. Okay. I mean, yeah, all right.
If our political leaders don't have the stones to do anything about it and would rather we just forgot the whole affair, it's our job to remember when we vote. And we've been lucky that much of the president's illegality.
And we could also again perhaps remember some of the things that Joe Biden may or may not have been done either directly or as part of the Obama administration. We could talk about the IRS scandals. We could talk about Benghazi. We could talk about the various, issues that happened with the Obama administration, the ATF gun walking scandal, my personal favorite, the Fast and Furious scandal, that was super fun. The Clinton cash scandal, that's good. There's quite a few issues there, but we don't want to talk about any of those because it would be super inconvenient right now. Okay, that's fine. Let's press on.
Reality has been boneheaded and incompetent, but we might not be so lucky next time. And that's how we bungled our way into the scandal of the Trump administration when the president started to politicize the entire enforcement wing of the executive branch, when the president fired the director of the FBI, specifically because he was investigating the president's ties to Russia. Then
not to put too fine a point on it, but there were definitely calls from Democrats to fire Comey before Trump became elected. A lot of Democrats were very upset with Comey about the release of the way that he produced his stuff, and he had that press conference. So, if you remember in the long ago, in the far away, before Trump became elected, there were definitely calls from Democrats to fire Comey. And then Trump comes along and fires Comey, and a lot of then suddenly it's super, super bad. So yeah, it's like, and also, if we're talking about rule of law, that was legal. Trump can fire the FBI director. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, that was decidedly not legal. It was not something he was allowed to do under the law. It was an act of war, as a matter of fact. But when Trump fired the FBI director, that wasn't super legal. It was just normal legal. It's a thing the president can do. How did he violate the rule of law by firing the FBI director? It's something that's within his province as the president. He can do that. Okay.
The president told the Russians in a secret Oval Office meeting, "I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off." And then the president admitted to the entire thing to Lester Holt on national television.
When I decided.
Yeah, I also remember that. I also remember that time because Trump says to the Russians, well, there was a lot of pressure and now it's taken off. I also remember the time that Trump said, after the re-election, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you. Oh, wait, no, that wasn't Trump who said that to the Russians. That was Obama who said that to the Russians on an open mic. Yeah, so it's like, again, is it whataboutism? Was it a pox on both of our houses? Is it just that we're not treating the same things differently? But like Trump said to the Russians, well, now the pressure's off. You know who else basically said that? Obama. Now that we've had re-election, after the re-election, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you, Dmitriev. I remember. Yep.
To just do it. I said to myself, I said, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
And then, as we know from the Mueller report, there was an entire scheme to cover all of this up.
The Russia thing was pretty much completely made up. It was pretty much totally made up. Yeah. The Mueller report really doesn't show anything. The Russia stuff. If you think that Trump obstructed justice or something or committed other violations, okay, but the Russia part of it really never panned out. And so when Trump says, "Well, this was fake news," it kind of was fake news. The Steele dossier was basically proven to be fake. This black propaganda from the Democrats was basically proven to be fake. And we don't want to talk about that. Yeah, all right. So, okay, pressing on.
The Mueller report is practically a flashing red siren that says that the president and his accomplices engaged in an obstruction of justice on par or worse than the Watergate scandal. And yet, for prudential reasons, they decided not to refer it for prosecution, hoping that the legislative branch would do something about it. And of course, unfortunately, they did not. But that doesn't change the impropriety of the underlying conduct. And the second half of the Mueller report is almost equally damning, that even if the Trump administration and the Trump...
Yeah, so on the obstruction of justice stuff, it gets really interesting technically when you talk about the president of the United States. I know this is a little bit off field, but it is legal education. So, but there is an interesting issue with the president's ability to obstruct justice or not, and it's the same issue that was around during the Watergate era. And again, whether the president can be impeached for it is a whole nother set of problems. So Richard Nixon was definitely on the path to being impeached, which is one of the reasons he resigned to avoid that problem. But the ultimate legal question about whether or not Nixon was obstructing justice or not gets complicated because he's the president of the United States and he's in charge of the executive branch. So it's a little bit weird. But yeah, if you want to think that Trump obstructed justice by doing certain things, then okay. But you could also make, again, maybe this is whataboutism or a pox in both our houses, but you could also say, well, there's obstruction of justice when the Obama administration refused to turn over Fast and Furious documents to the Congress in response to a valid subpoena. Would that be obstruction of justice because they refused a valid subpoena and then they refused to prosecute themselves for their own obstruction of justice and their own contempt of Congress? Was that invalid? So, maybe it's a pox in both our houses, maybe it's whataboutism, but still it's like a differential treatment problem. And so, there's issues here.
Trump organization did not engage in actual conspiracy and collusion with the Russians. They still solicited and encouraged illegal...
That is kind of a big deal there. Let's just go back a second and just make sure we fully appreciate that little note there.
Conduct. And the second half of the Mueller report is almost equally damning, that even if the Trump administration and the Trump organization did not engage in actual conspiracy and collusion with the Russians...
That's kind of a big deal. Like whether or not they actually engaged in a conspiracy or collusion, which incidentally, collusion doesn't have a legal term. Collusion's not a legal thing. It doesn't have a legal definition. Conspiracy definitely does. So collusion's more of a colloquial term that encompasses potentially a couple different charges that you could do. Conspiracy being the most obvious, but like accessories or like maybe some antitrust things or something. So the collusion doesn't have an actual legal definition. But to say that, well, Trump didn't actually engage in this collusion, didn't actually conspire, kind of important, I would think. He didn't actually do the thing we're accusing him of. All right.
They still solicited and encouraged illegal hacking for their own personal gain, and certainly benefited from that hacking. And then,
this is also such an aside, but as a strictly legal question, encouraging someone to break the law is not. Suggesting that people should break the law is not illegal. So when Trump said Russia, maybe you want to hack this, that's almost certainly not illegal. It's not to actually solicit something has an actual definition. So if you think solicitation as an actual thing. It's an actual, like, I want you to do X for this, this money. You do this for me, I do this for you. It's solicitation. You see signs that say no solicitation. You know what solicitation is, right? It's like someone comes and says, I'd like to sell you this thing in exchange for this thing, or I'd like to buy this in exchange for that thing. That's a solicitation. And so you can have criminal solicitation too. I'd like you to commit this criminal act in exchange for this thing, whatever. But solicitation does have a technical definition. So if he had actually solicited it, that might be a problem, but he didn't. What he basically did is said, Russia, it would be good if you would hack these emails and release them. And that is actually protected free speech, the way that Trump did it. So I know this point is beyond legal eagle's point, but you can actually encourage people to break crimes in general. You can say it would be good for the Russians to hack in these emails and release them and make them available, which is essentially what Trump did. That's a legal thing for you to do. You can encourage people to break the law. As long as you're not doing it imminently, as long as you're not soliciting it, as long as there's exceptions, but as a general proposition, it would be good for Russia to hack these emails and release them is a legal thing for the president to say. It's a legal thing for anyone to say. That's protected speech. Just, FYI.
Of course, there's a whole raft of pettier but equally damning malfeasance. For example, the president's solicitation of emoluments. Now, granted, there are open questions about the limits of the emoluments clause in the Constitution, but it's clear that the president has more conflicts of interest than any president in history. The president owns and operates myriad businesses while holding office, which is rife for conflicts of interest. Hundreds of thousands of dollars have been spent by the US military under extraordinarily suspicious circumstances at the Trump Turnberry Gulf Resort. And failing to divest himself has left himself open to bribes from every visiting politician in DC, who love to brag about staying in the Trump DC hotel.
Okay. So we have to have a discussion again about what the word bribe means, because the word bribe, again, has a specific legal definition. It's not just like a term. It actually is, there's a quid pro quo for there to be a bribe. A bribe is, you do this for me and I give you this result. And you can couch it in obviously more sophisticated language. It doesn't have to be that direct in terms of the vernacular, but that's the thing. Like, it's an exchange. That's a bribe. You do this improper thing in exchange for which I do this thing for you. That's a bribe. So if people are staying at Trump's hotels in the hope that he'll look upon it positively, that is not legally a bribe. And this distinction, incidentally, does matter quite a lot to all of our friendly members of Congress too, because they have to make sure, you can't bribe a member of Congress. You can't do a quid pro quo. But every time that you go to a fundraising dinner, right, you just think about like the way that Congress does business. You go to fundraising dinners at $5,000 a head. The dinner's not $5,000. So what are you hoping for, really? There's no explicit exchange. And they never say, well, if you pay for this dinner, I'll look at you more favorably. They never say that. It's all implied. If you give me a donation of this amount, there's never said, but it's implied that, I'll look upon things more favorably to you. If you join with people as part of this organization, this PAC, and help fund my campaign, it's never said, but it's implied by the whole exchange that I'm going to look things more favorably. So on a sort of very broad level, what people are doing by staying in the Trump hotel and hoping that it will earn his favor as a result is really not, in my opinion, fundamentally different than paying $5,000 to go to a political dinner hosted by some politician. If you can explain to me how staying at the Trump hotel in the hope that Trump will look at you more favorably is fundamentally different than paying $5,000 to attend a VIP dinner for a politician. If you can explain to me how one is fundamentally different than the other, I'd love to hear it, because I don't see it. And unless there is an actual, like, if you stay at my hotel, I will give you this thing, like, whatever. And he says, well, his business opportunities open him up for this kind of corruption. I'm like, it really doesn't. Because, again, every politician of any note, even if they don't have businesses, basically does this through political dinners, through political fundraising. Give me money and I will look upon you more favorably. So does it open Trump up for some sort of special corruption that people can stay at his hotel and as a result, he'll help them out more? Does that open up for some special corruption? Not really, because presumably in the alternative, he'd be hosting $5,000 dinners like everyone else. How is one fundamentally different than the other? I don't know. It doesn't seem like that would make sense, you know. And someone pointed out the Trump hotel visits are not $5,000. Well, it depends how long you stay, I suppose, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't the point of how much is spent. The point was like, what is the fundamental difference in the nature of the exchange, not the amounts that we're talking about. So whether Trump's hotel costs $5,000 a night or whatever was not quite the point I was looking to establish.
And from every foreign business partner, including China, where the president holds an undisclosed bank account, potentially to hide foreign corrupt practices.
Can you imagine if I had a secret Chinese bank account when I was running for re-election? You think Fox News might have been a little concerned about that?
The president has asked his...
Well, here you can split that difference you can split that difference technically, because if you can split this difference, and whether or not you think Fox News would have split the difference or anyone else would have split the difference is a fair point. Maybe they wouldn't have split the difference, but you can split the difference pretty easily. If Obama had a Chinese bank account, the question would be, why do you have a Chinese bank account? That would be the reasonable question, right? What is the nature of this Chinese bank account? What's going on? And Trump explained that this Chinese bank account, he said, and the way he said it in his debate, on the third debate, is like, yes, I had a Chinese bank account. I was looking to do business in China, so I had a Chinese bank account to facilitate that. That makes total sense. It was part of my normal business operations. I have bank accounts in lots of different countries. That makes total sense. It's like, yeah, because you want that to be there. So it was opened up and then it was closed down. It wasn't a secret. It was disclosed, and it was part of just normal business operations. So for Trump, that rationale makes sense. It was part of just normal business operations to have bank accounts in the countries that I'm doing these massive projects in, because it facilitates the project. Makes total logical sense. And so then if Obama had a Chinese bank account, well, what's your reason? And I don't know that Obama would have a good reason for his bank account. So you could say this again, and this is also just generally true in law more generally. It's like the same thing can be criminal or not criminal depending on other factors, right? Two people do the same thing. One can be criminal, one can be not criminal. Depends on other factors, right? Depends on what else is going on. And even if it's not criminal, it can be more suspicious. So assuming that that you would ask, so assuming that Obama has a bank account in China, assuming that Trump has a bank account in China, your question might be like, what else is going on? And what is the rationales? And Trump's rationale makes sense. If you don't buy it, I understand. But yeah, if you don't buy it, I understand. But the rationale makes sense. And then the question would be like, okay, Obama, what's your rationale? And presumably he doesn't have one because it doesn't make sense for him. So it's like, yeah, can you imagine if this had happened to me? What would happen? Yes, because your rationale wouldn't have made any sense for it. And again, if you think Fox News, wouldn't have done that if Trump were a Democrat, if you think that they would have made different news reporting if Trump were a Democrat about it, yeah, fair enough. Maybe they would have. But the rationale for it on an objective level is fairly easy to split, even if Fox News wouldn't have done that. So anyways.
His attorney general to interfere with the prosecution of Trump loyalists. The president has gassed protesters exercising their First Amendment rights to get a photo op in Lafayette Square. The president has sent federal troops into cities on a whim. He's turned the government into his own personal campaign.
Federal troops into cities on a whim. Okay, first of all, I object to the use of the word troops here, because troops implies military. And to the best of my knowledge, they're not military. There might have been some National Guard, but I don't believe he's nationalized the National Guard in any of these states, although I could be wrong. So I object to the term troops because that implies military. But Trump has been sending in federal law enforcement to protect federal assets in places where those federal assets are being threatened. On a whim, sure, but it's a whim that's being directed by the ongoing threat against those assets. Federal courthouses and federal property, and so forth and so on. So yeah, Trump has been sending in federal law enforcement to enforce federal law as it relates to federal assets on a whim. Okay, yeah, all right. Why is this a problem? I don't know, but all right. Okay.
and fails to punish government employees who violate the Hatch Act. And again, this goes to the heart of the democracy. Income is
what crap did he just say about the Hatch Act? Hold on, I missed that part.
And fails to punish government employees who violate the Hatch Act. And again, this goes to the
I don't know specifically what he means here about government employees who violate the Hatch Act. I'm not sure what scandal he's referring to here. The Hatch Act, by its own terms, the Hatch Act deals essentially with it deals with government employees, federal government employees, and they're assisting in political campaigns. There's rules on this. You can't use government assets to forward a campaign. You can't use, there's rules around that. Now, the president and vice president are exempt from the Hatch Act by the Hatch Act's own terms. So if he means the president and vice president are not subject to the Hatch Act. They never were. And then particularly the non-career employees of the government, the senior executive service, SES, which are the higher levels of political appointees, and also the highest levels of the political appointees, like the cabinet administration. I don't believe that they are subject to the Hatch Act in the same way. It's been a little bit since I've checked, but I believe they're allowed to do things that career employees are not allowed to do. So I'm not sure what he thinks was a violation of the Hatch Act, but I'm not aware of any particular violation that's been brought to my attention. Kellyanne Conway. Yeah, the Hatch Act, using the White House for a political campaign. Yes, but the president isn't subject to the Hatch Act. So the president using the White House for part of his political campaign is not a violation of the Hatch Act because the president is not subject to the Hatch Act. So that doesn't fly. What did Kellyanne Conway do? Allegedly that violated the Hatch Act. I don't know. Pompeo in Israel. Pompeo though is a secretary of something, right? So the secretary, because he gave some speech in support of Trump during his political campaign, but I believe that Pompeo can do that because I believe that what he did is not a violation of the Hatch Act, because he's a political appointee, and so the Hatch Act doesn't apply the same way. So yeah, I don't believe that Pompeo is Let me just look it up real fast. So let's see. The Hatch Act prohibits all federal employees except the president and vice president from engaging in various political activities. Generally true. The law states federal employees cannot use their official authority or influence to interfere with or affect the result of an election. Pompeo did not refer to himself as Secretary of State in the video, but he did record the video during an official visit to Israel. So he didn't use his official authority. Since Pompeo is part of the NSC, he's subject to further restriction. Such employees cannot take active part in partisan political campaigns, for example, campaigning for or against a candidate or slate candidates, make campaign speeches, or engage in other candidate activities. Pompeo violated these restrictions. Are these part of the law? Are these actually just memos or something? So maybe he violated the Hatch Act, or maybe not. But we'd have to get into the details of it. Less restricted employees. Most executive branch employees are considered less restricted. Less restricted may take active part in partisan political campaigns. Who are further restricted activities. Further activities are prohibited from engaging in political campaigns. And there are certain positions for which that's true as part of the National Security Division, National Intelligence Office of Special Counsel, National Security Council. So he's more restricted as part of the NSC from engaging in activities. So maybe he violated the Hatch Act there. Possible. Yeah, but he didn't use his official designation, so we'd have to actually get into the weeds on that one, which we're not here for. But yeah, at least superficially plausible.
The heart of the democracy. Incumbents get a huge advantage by operating the levers of the government. And he seems to operate the entire US government as his own personal re-election campaign, which is probably good because the last 3 campaign heads that he's had are actual convicted felons, or in the case of Brad Parscale, are about to be felons. The president has almost surely engaged in manifest tax evasion. He likes to pardon and commute the sentences of his cronies who
tax evasion is illegal. Tax avoidance is not illegal. And he says, well, he's almost certainly engaged in tax evasion. I'd love to see how you figure that out. Yeah, tax avoidance is not illegal. So yeah, how he's evaded taxes, I don't know. You think maybe because he overly depreciated his assets or something on a tax? I mean, that's possible. But you know, it's common for tax preparers to push the boundaries of that. You know, so what Trump did is not like manifestly different, although maybe he went past the line. That's possible. But tax evasion is actually illegal. But the idea of like taking on debt and putting money into buildings and using those exemptions, I mean, that's generally allowed for by tax law. So if he used the tax law for his advantage, then, you know, he's just doing a good job. All right.
Who have engaged in real illegality, obstruction of justice, and lying to the government. And as part of that, he has politicized the Department of Justice, leading to investigations for his own political gain and retribution. He interferes with the prosecution of his friends and business partners. And unfortunately, this is the tip of the iceberg, because the president has fired most of the inspectors general, often after they have found improprieties within the Trump administration. And lest we forget one of the most disgusting things he said,
Ooh.
He admitted to forcible sexual assault before he was elected the first time.
I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the do anything.
The president doesn't deserve the benefit.
You can parse that statement, you know, as more of a hypothetical than an admission. Now, whether or not you want to parse it as a hypothetical rather than an admission, I suppose is an issue for your judgment. But he says, like, you can, and it's not to say that he did, right? So to say, well, because I'm a star of this renown, this is something I could do, is not necessarily to say it's something I did do. So it's not quite, you know, you could parse it either way. And if you want to say that this is an admission, like, okay, I mean, that's something a reasonable juror, I suppose, could conclude. But you could also conclude it's a hypothetical. So that's more of an issue of fact. Was it an admission, or was it merely a hypothetical? It's more of a question of fact. But you could parse it either way, I guess. But I mean, this is not like new information. Incidentally, it was information that was known before the first election. So this is not new information. People knew this information when they voted on it. So apparently the voters at least believe it was more hypothetical, I guess. Or yeah.
Bit of the doubt. He had his chance. And at least in this respect, he was worse than a lot of us could have imagined. This is apart from issues of politics or competence. I wouldn't fault you at all if you chose not to vote for Trump because of his politics, but it's not my role as a lawyer and legal commentator to tell you about your political beliefs. And similarly, I might agree with you if
Legal Eagle has no issue in telling us about our political beliefs. Okay. Yeah, sure. You're just a neutral legal commentator over here. You have nothing to say about our political beliefs and whether they're good or bad. Sure, that definitely sounds plausible. Yeah.
If you felt he didn't deserve the vote because he was wildly incompetent, like either ignores his daily classified briefings or requires them to be in picture book format, incompetent, or injecting disinfectant into your veins, incompetent.
All right. So for just for what it's worth, incidentally, the daily national security briefing that's provided, and you can find people talking about it. Different presidents like it differently. Different presidents do it differently. So there's not like one way to get the daily briefing. And so, because different people learn different ways. So some people like a written memo. Some people like it presented more orally. Some people like it as more discussion. And so he wants more pictures in it to show things, like, so it's not just words on a page. He wants to actually see the imagery in the daily report. It seems like a reasonable thing. Like, you know, you saw like Obama, and I'm not criticizing Obama here, because that's the way Obama likes it. That's perfectly fine. But you saw like the ones that were public, the national security memos that he got, or the ones for Bush that were just more text on the page. So that's the way he likes it. Okay, no problem. That's the way you like it. I understand, no problem. And if Trump says, well, you know, I'd like to actually see some imagery in this so I can actually see for my own self what they're talking about, that doesn't seem like completely absurd. And if he wants an oral presentation, that's not absurd. And if he wants it, you know, there's different people want different. Some people want it really spayed out. Some people just want some bullet points. There's a lot of different ways to do it, man. And he says, well, I'd like some pictures. Oh, he's a kindergartner because he wants pictures in his picture book. What? He's a child because he wants his book to be a picture book with pictures. What? I mean, can you show me what you're talking about? Like with actual pictures? That's beyond the pale. That shows him to be incompetent. Okay.
Injection inside or almost a cleaning. Again, I say maybe you can, maybe you can't. I'm not a doctor, but I'm like a person that has a good you-know-what.
Or like staring into a solar eclipse, incompetent. But what I am saying is that
I don't know that I necessarily qualify that as staring, although it's not necessarily advisable. But he did look up at the sun twice for a very brief period of time. I'm not exactly sure I qualify that as staring into the sun. I don't know if anyone else has ever looked directly into the sun before, but like for just like brief period of time. But like, for a second, it won't kill you. If you do it for long periods of time, you're definitely going to have a bad day. But yeah, so he wasn't necessarily advisable. I don't necessarily call that staring into the sun, but okay, maybe that's semantics.
some things are apolitical, or that even if you agree 100% with what the president stands for from a political perspective, perhaps there are more important things, like the rule of law. The problem is that once you lose it, you never get it back.
All right. We just have to really pause here and just really unpack this statement from Devin here. Okay. So maybe there are more important things, such as the rule of law. Okay. I accept your premise. The rule of law is more important than politics. Fine. And then he says, once you lose it, you never get it back. Okay. Does anyone else see the inherent problem here? I'll give you a second to think about it if you haven't spotted it already. He says, once you lose the rule of law, you don't get it back. What is the inherent problem in his argument? Give it a second. All right. For those of you who haven't gotten there, the inherent problem is Trump is already the president. So if it were really true that Trump is completely violating and flouting and destroying the rule of law, and it is definitely true that Trump is already the president, then that means that we can't do anything about it. So his own argument is a bit self-defeating here, because he's like, well, once you lose the rule of law, you never get it back. And you lose the rule of law by, for example, electing Donald Trump. What? That already happened. So if electing Donald Trump means that we're abandoning the rule of law, and once you lose the rule of law, you can never get the rule of law back, then, it's already too late. The rule of law would already be gone. So electing Trump or not would be pointless because you can't get it back. It would already be gone because electing Trump is the thing that would get rid of the rule of law, and we already did that. There's a bit of a self-contradiction in that argument there. Can't quite square that circle on that one. If you vote for Donald Trump, it means abandoning the rule of law. So don't vote for Donald Trump, because if you do, we'll abandon the rule of law and we'll never get it back. Okay. All right.
And there is a barbarian in the White House. President Trump is not the candidate of law and order. He cares about a certain kind of order, all right, but not the law. A vote for President Trump is a vote that says the law doesn't matter. It's a vote that says it's okay if the rich and powerful use the law unequally. It's a vote that says criminals will not be punished. But that only happens if we allow it.
Again, presumably we already did allow it, right? I mean, your argument is completely that Trump has already done these things. So your argument is it would only become true if we voted for it, but we kind of already did because he's already president. So you say, well, he would only be able to get away with it if we voted for him, but we already voted for him. There's a bit of a contradiction there. It's like, it can't quite square that circle on that one. I
still believe the law matters. I still believe in equal protection.
Uh-huh.
I still believe in justice. And I hope you do too. And I hope that you consider the rule of law when you vote.
I think considering the rule of law when you vote is very good. And one of the things you might consider as you're considering the rule of law as you're voting might be, for example, the packing of the Supreme Court, which I think is by far and away the biggest threat to the rule of law, because it will unbalance the separation of powers that we currently have. You know, we have a good balance in the separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, and we have a good balance on the separation of powers between the federal government and the state's government. And I think if you're considering rule of law, one of the things you might consider is the packing of the Supreme Court, which the Democrats seem like they are definitely going to do. And I think that will cause a massive existential problem, because then you'll turn the court into just a truly political branch, and I don't know how you come back from that. So if you're voting on rule of law principles and you'd like to vote to maintain rule of law, you might want to consider voting against Biden, because Biden will pack the court. And even if he doesn't want to pack the court, the Democrats in general will pack the court, and I don't see him vetoing that. I don't see him vetoing that. The incentives from the Democrats are all to pack the court. The Chuck, Schumer, if he becomes majority leader, has to be concerned about Ocasio-Cortez challenging him from the left on a primary as a Senate seat. So Schumer's incentives are to go to the left to prevent Ocasio-Cortez from challenging him in a primary for his Senate seat. So Schumer is going to go further to the left just from that drag, and Nancy Pelosi will want to go further to the left too. And so, like, if you're concerned about rule of law, maybe you should be concerned about what will happen to the Supreme Court in the future. That's just a good idea. And then he says, remember, vote. And I would agree. Remember, please vote if you have not already. So, yeah. So that is the end of Legal Eagle Stream. Super enjoying. So, yeah. Biden isn't going to pack the court. He'll die in office, and Harris will. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the real threat isn't Biden. Yeah, Biden isn't really that big a threat. Biden, in the grand scheme of things, is a fairly moderate guy. The problem is his ability to constrain his own party, and whether or not he remains in office, and whether or not he really can be a bulwark against them. Because Schumer's incentives are to go to the left to prevent AOC from challenging him. Pelosi's incentives are to go to the left, and whether or not he can serve as a resistance to all that. Yeah. So Biden being president isn't that big a deal, and then of course whether Biden stays in office and whether or not Harris becomes president is a whole nother problem. So yeah. So that's what's going on. So yeah. And have I done a breakdown of Tinker? I think I did a breakdown of Tinker. You can double check my channel on that, but I think so. Yeah, I have 500 videos. I can't remember all the videos I've done of here, but yeah, so that's all good. But I can't remember everything. He's anything but moderate. Have you seen him on gun control? Yeah, I have. His gun control policies are, yeah. I mean, he's moderate comparatively. He's moderate comparative to some of his other brethren. He's moderate in that sense, yeah. Bond is based. He called black super predators. He sure did. I'm libertarian. I'm voting for Democratic nominee for the first time because Trump is that big of a threat. Well, that is your voting prerogative. I would recommend, again, that's against it, but it is your right to vote. So go nuts. So we'll see. Yeah. Yeah. So exactly 2 years and an hour. So Harris can have 2.5 terms. Exactly correct. Connie says, I want to say I greatly disagree with your politics, but respect your opinion. Fair enough. That's fine. You don't have to agree with my politics, but I appreciate that you respect me presenting them. That's fine. The Supreme Court nomination is no different than 15% of all other nominations. No different. I don't even know what the 15% means, but yeah, the nomination is not fundamentally different. Libertarians are cute. No, libertarians I understand. I'm right-leaning libertarian. I'm not far libertarian. I just did political compass recently. I was about 3 ticks to the right, and I was about 2 ticks down. So 2 ticks on the libertarian scale. So, but I understand the libertarians. You know, there's fine. Oh, there are 144 justices and 15% of them came in election year. Okay, now I understand. That's correct. I understand. That's fine. At 29, that's right. Where can I contact my voting board to find out if I voted? Can I record that call? Depends what state you're in. Some states are one-party consent. Some states are not. You'll have to check your state law to see if you're a one-party consent state or not. Yeah. The footage, they have control the Senate to pack the courts. Yeah, that seems to be where they're going. The packing of the court is a really big deal. Libertarian voting for the party who wants less government, more theft. Yeah, I agree with that. I was about 3 ticks right, 1 up. Fair enough. Yeah, so we're close enough. Biden won't have the guts to take our guns. I don't know, man. I think the Democrats can get through their assault weapons ban, which will be even more expensive than the 1994 ban. Tell them you're recording. If it's 2-party consent, you can do that too. Yeah, you can do that too, to announce it at the top. Well, we've been doing this for an hour, so I'm going to cut the stream. Thanks for everyone who was here. Hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the stream, please give it a like. If you're not already done so, please give it a subscribe. If you've not already hit join for 99 cents. You too can become an uncivilian, and you can help us to support the channel. And until later, my friends, I hope all's well. Cheers and goodbye.